Couples who live together before marrying have nearly an 80% higher divorce rate than those who do not, which is crazy.
I don't know if I'd say it's crazy, but I would say it's not true.
This isn't my area of research, so if you want to learn more, I'm going to tag Dr. Rachel in the comments because she has a great video on like the content of this. But I do know how to Google statistics. Per usual, when you don't cite your sources, it's really hard for people to know where you get the information from. Cite your sources. But I just typed the stats straight into Google to see what came up. A New York Times article from 1987. Couples who lived together before marrying have nearly an 80% higher divorce rate than those who did not. That's like almost verbatim what they just said, right? 1987, New York Times article. But where did the New York Times get this handy dandy stat? Well, what do you know? In 1987, they were citing their sources. It came from a study of Swedish women that was done by the National Bureau of Economic Research. I'll tell you more about the study in a minute, but of note, right off the bat, like right after they give that stat, let's look at this quote from one of the authors of this research. We are not saying in any way that cohabitating causes higher divorce rates. So like already, based on what the author of the study themselves said, this 80% stat from the 1980s, from Swedish women in particular, is being taken wildly out of context. Again, if you want to learn more about the content of this, please see Dr. Rachel's TikTok. The study was based on a 1981 survey of 4,996 Swedish women. Then the researchers also did some interviews for people who were between 20 and 44. One of the researchers said, hey, we picked the Swedes because trends there tend to precede American social trends by 10 to 15 years. But then they talked to another researcher who studies in the US, and she said that according to her research, the divorce rate between Americans who live together and those don't isn't really that different. What's amazing about this New York Times article from the 1980s is it's giving full context. It gives the stat, it has the researchers explaining the stat, it gets another researcher who has like found not the same thing to talk about that. Like, talk about full context for a statistic. Like, I'm loving this 1980s New York Times article. But back to what they said in this podcast. Not my field, not my area of expertise. I cannot explain this, but I can say sharing that stat is misinformation. Do couples who live together before they're married have an 80% higher divorce rate? I don't know. They found that for Swedish women in the 1980s. I'll leave you with this. The researcher stressed that the study did not indicate that living together before marriage doomed a relationship. The researcher. So if you're living with someone, you're not married to them yet, but you want to be married to them, based on this stat and this research, I really wouldn't be too pressed about it.